Okay, guys. Last week we finished the high priestly prayer. We broke that up into two studies, and Jesus is headed now to the Garden of Gethsemane, and we're going to pick up the lesson today, which is relatively shorter than some we've been looking at, but it's still a very deep lesson. Um, and we're just approaching where all the action begins, and it's going to be fast and furious over the next several weeks when we just study the hours that are going to begin to take place uh, after the garden scene. But right now, let's look back just for a second. The last half of the high priestly prayer, which we believe took place at the end of the Lord's Supper. Some key points I want us to remember and drive home in our own application. First of all, in the midst of facing terrible circumstances, Jesus still praised the Father. He opened his prayer and concluded it with prayer. Praise. Can't get my words out. Also, he always had, no matter where he was when he was traveling, all the last 3 years of his ministry that we studied intently, he always had a place of solitude to go and pray. And when he was in the Bethany, Jerusalem area, it was the Garden of Gethsemane, was his place of choice. And looking at the disciples at that time, in the midst of confusion and uncertainty, which is really hard for us to actually put our feet into their sandals at this point, having walked with the Lord for 3 years, seen his miracles and the many things he's taught and done, for him now to be proclaiming that he's going to his death and resurrection, which had never been heard of before. Um, they had to have been very confused and not really understanding, knowing what was going on, but they still followed him, even though they didn't. It wasn't clear and they couldn't understand it all. They still put their faith in him and followed him, and that's what we need to do also, because circumstances around us are not always, we don't always understand them. And remember, the enemy, as we've talked about, tries to use that to discourage us from our faith and to push us to the point of breaking and abandoning the faith, where he sifts us and stirs up stirs us up internally to agitate us to the point of failure. And also, where we think we are strongest is where the enemy is certain to attack. Peter thought he could withstand anything, proclaimed his undying devotion to the Lord, and so did the rest of the disciples. And yet, we're going to find them all, all fleeing. And finally, I introduced to you just an interesting acronym for the word HALT. We are most vulnerable to the enemy's attacks when we are hungry, we're angry, where we feel like we're alone or lonely, and when we're fatigued or tired. HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So now we move to the actual scene in the Garden of Gethsemane. At this point, MacArthur is pulling from all four gospel writers to put together the story of what's taking place or will take place here that we're going to look at in the garden. So we have bits and pieces from each of the four gospel writers put into this next section. So we read, "Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. And he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I go and pray over there.' And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, the sons of thunder, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. He said to them, 'My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. stay here and watch with me. Pray that you may not enter into temptation. He went a little farther, being withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down on the ground and fell on his face and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. If it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, meaning the three, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to Peter, What, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Why do you sleep? Rise, watch, and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again, a second time he went away and prayed and spoke the same words, saying, O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. So he left them, went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples the third time and said to them, Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, in a sermon that he preached in 1885 entitled The Man Christ Jesus, said, It will not be enough for you to hear or read about Christ. You must do your own thinking and consider your Lord for yourselves. The wine is not made by gathering the clusters, but by treading the grapes in the wine vat. Under pressure, the red juice leaps forth. Not the truth as you read it, but the truth as you meditate upon it will become a blessing to you. Amen. Shut yourself up with Jesus if you would know him. We've reached a point in our studies now where the Lord's 3 years of ministry has been completed. He has preached his last sermon. He's performed his last miracle. He's taken the last Passover meal he'll have, and he's taught his disciples the last lesson. We conclude that the day and time of the Passover meal was either in AD 33 or possibly 30. But whatever, it is now late at night, possibly midnight or later on Thursday of the week of the Passion. And we read again our passage that has been set aside here. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. And he said to his disciples, Sit here while I go and pray over there. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John. So Jesus apparently left 8 of the disciples. Remember, now there's 11. Judas having slipped away to go find his crowd to bring to the garden. And he's left 8 of them at the entrance to the garden, possibly to have them make sure that he would not be disturbed. Just not really sure why, but he took his 3 intimates, Peter, James, and John, deeper into the garden with him. But he still separated himself from them for his most anguishing time of prayer. And if you guys want, from time to time, flip back to the last lesson's notes and the photo I gave you of the Garden of Gethsemane, just to kind of remember the size and shape and distance we're talking about here. MacArthur writes, Jesus did not take them, meaning the three intimates, along in order to have their companionship, sympathy, or help. He loved them deeply and doubtlessly enjoyed their company, but he knew them far too well to expect them to be of any assistance to him in his crucial hour. He took them along for their benefit, not for his. His purpose also was to teach that as important and helpful as the fellowship and support of other believers can be, there are times when one's only help is by direct communion with God in prayer. He wanted to show them vividly that in his humanness, even the divine Son of God needed the sustenance of his heavenly Father. I think it's a very important statement that MacArthur had there. And Matthew records, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. The Greek word for sorrowful here is perilupos, and it means to be encompassed or overwhelmed with grief. Very sad and exceedingly sorrowful. And it's followed by another Greek word, adamanao, which means to be deeply distressed and troubled. Both of those Greek words put together side by side in the same sentence, trying to describe the anguish and distress, has a much more powerful meaning than the English translation can do justice. Mm-hmm. This was an anguish that by itself alone would cause one to potentially die. Mm-hmm. It was not the anticipated anguish of the beatings. And this is where it's important. We need to remember this. The crown of thorns or the nails and excruciating death on the cross that he was about to suffer. It was the prospect of him being separated from the Father, even for a brief period of time, which brought him to the very point of physical death as he prayed. Now, unlike the synoptic writers, John makes no mention of Jesus's agonized prayer to the Father. John's emphasis is different on the events of this night, and it does not contradict what the synoptic gospel writers have written, but it supplements it. John's focus throughout his gospel has always been the deity of Christ, which shines through the suffering and agony and signs upon which John, places emphasis with respect to his deity. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me. Pray that you may not enter into temptation." There again, we have a repeat of the word perilupos. He's encompassed with grief and exceedingly sorrowful. And even as Jesus was facing the most terrible anguish of the soul known to any man, his concern was for his disciples that they may not enter into temptation. I wish we could take to heart and understand that we must constantly guard ourselves against the enemy who would love to distract us from our faith, yes, discourage us during the trials of our lives, and destroy our testimony due to our physical weaknesses, which we tend to think are really our strengths. Remember, where we think we're strong is where the enemy's going to attack.
And all of that comes under that they may not enter into temptation. That's what that particular phrase means. As we go through life, this particular statement that they may not enter into temptation Just basically just means being distracted in life and all those things, and especially while they were going through that horrible time with
Exactly.
their father.
And remember, that is not a new theme for Jesus. The model prayer, okay, has that very same plea.
Yes.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Excuse me. So he went a little farther, being withdrawn from them, meaning the intimates, about a stone's throw. And he knelt down on the ground and fell on his face and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. If it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He moved away from his intimates in anguish before the Father over the cup he was about to drink. But his willingness to be obedient in all that the Father had tasked him to do overrode the great sorrow of being separated from the Father. So he resolved, not my will, but yours be done. He was focused on doing the will of the Father. Now look, the term cup in both the Old and New Testament, the Hebrew word is kos and the Greek word is poterion, they both refer to a drinking vessel. However, metaphorically in the Bible, it can also, well, it does refer metaphorically in the Bible to a divine allocation of either blessing or wrath. In this case, because of the context, we can infer that it represents God's wrath upon the Son when he becomes sin for us. 2 Corinthians, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. And in Isaiah 51, awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk at the hand of the Lord the cup of his fury. You have drunk the dregs of the cup of trembling and drained it out. This is referring to their rebellion and the result of God's wrath. In Revelation 14, then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark, the beast's mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. So the key issue to understand here from this verse is that to the very end, Jesus was seeking to accomplish the Father's will, not his own, despite what his humanity was crying out against. He gave himself as an example for us right up unto his death. And another thing I want to point out here, he cried, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. In the Aramaic, Abba is the intimate term for father. It's like daddy, okay? In Aramaic, it's Baba, okay? In Aramaic, it's Abba. But he was, crying out, with intimacy to his Father, saying, if it's your will, take the cup from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. So then Luke records, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. I find it interesting that Luke, who was not an original member of the 12, and therefore had to rely on their testimonies, along with Mary, Jesus' mother, and what he had described in his gospel, including for what he scribed in his gospel, but he includes this account of an angel. None of the other writers mention an angel. So the question becomes, how did Luke know about this angel? The word angel in the Greek, it's angelos, means messenger. And in the biblical context, it's a messenger or minister from God. Angels, as spiritual messengers from God, are able to assume human form, or they can appear in dreams or visions. Um, According to the gospel writers, angels appeared to Jesus on two occasions. The first during his temptation in the wilderness, both Matthew chapter 4 records that, and then in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Luke records it here in chapter 22. Um, I've had experiences with I strongly believe are angels, and I've had both, the vision dream type. I've had also what I think were physical angels who appeared. When I taught this lesson to the ladies the other day, Terry was here, and she brought up a time that we believe an angel came and interfered in a situation with our oldest daughter. She had gone off to college in Arkansas and was coming home driving her car uh, one weekend or whatever. Don't remember all the circumstances. She was coming home from college, and there was a huge thunderstorm going on. I mean, it was one of those just where everything was coming down, and she pulled up to the right hand side of a 18-wheeler, and he didn't see her. And he moved into her lane, and he caused her car to spin around in front of the 18-wheeler. He smacked her, and sent her off over into the guardrail on the opposite side of the lane. She was in the far right, and he was in the second lane, and he hit her just right where she spun out ahead of him, and he smacked her again in the front, and she spun across two lanes and ended up, up against the cement barricade for on the interstate. And, her, her, her car was destroyed. She's in there. She's just a young kid in college. You know, he continues off down the road, you know, disappears into the never, never. And, and all of a sudden, two ladies pull up, pull up behind Don's car, and they went and got her. She was shook. She was soaking wet. And her car was destroyed, and they put her in her car um, until a police car came. What happened was the truck driver went down to the next possible exit, and he turned around and did come back eventually. About the same time, the police showed up on the scene, and Don got out of the lady's car and went to talk to the police, and she turned back around in the car, and the ladies were gone, just like that. And to this day, um, we are thoroughly convinced that they were two angels that came, that comforted her, took care of her, watched over her, and as soon as she was in safe hands, you know, she disappeared. Just like the angel that came to me when I was in the Middle East and was about to get in serious trouble. Um, uh, as soon as he did what he did, he disappeared. I turned around, he was gone. Where'd this guy go? He was right here. Um, so anyway, uh, angels can take human form. I don't understand all there is to know about angels or the spirit world, but I know they can take human form, and I know they can appear in a spiritual form, either in a vision or a dream, um, and they're messengers from God. God is watching over us, and when we need, unique help in unique times, and by His providence, He can dispatch an angel, and He can dispatch that angel in a vision. It can happen when you're praying, or when you're sleeping in a dream, or that can physically, manifest itself, provide assistance. And that's why we're told also in Scripture, be careful, who you entertain because they could be angels.
Yes.
You
This
know,
reminds me too of the wilderness experience that Jesus was having. And the angels were visiting him there also.
mhm,
I don't know. I don't think John said anything about it, but the other synopsis
mhm.
writers did.
And Abraham, before Sodom and Gomorrah, the Lord came with two angels.
Yes.
They took human form. They spoke with him, communed with him. They ate with him. Okay. And, I think I told you, one of my experiences in the Middle East, I was invited to dinner at this, basically, a very high powered sheikh. He was the leader of a major tribe in Jordan. And, his sons and daughters were high up in government or in the civil courts and whatnot. I mean, he was way up there as the leader, and he's just like you would expect somebody like that, old, but, wearing, a stately robe, sitting in a stately chair in his home, and, everybody coming up to bow to him. And he hosted a dinner for me and his family. They have a dinner every Friday night. His family, they would come and have dinner together, men in one room and the women in the other. But I had been invited, and the men stood around a table, and we were eating with our fingertips like we traditionally do in the Arab world. And he did not come in to eat. He stood on the outside, of the room at the doorway, watching and observing. And I asked my friend, who had invited me to his, family's home, why isn't your father coming in and joining us? And his reference was back to Abraham and the angels, that Abraham prepared the meal for the angels, but he stood outside the tent, watching over them, making sure they had everything they needed. And this great stately, powerful sheikh, uh, who commanded a whole major tribe in the country of Jordan, stood on the outside of the doorway of his living room while we all ate, and he just watched. Um, but it was because of the angels, that Abraham had fed. So they are unusual creatures. If the angel had assumed a human form, I'm talking about the one in the garden, it would seem like the intimates who were with Jesus at the time must have seen him. For whatever reason, John, who was the only intimate to write a gospel account, that was there of this, he did not include this fact in the record. Only Luke does. So the source of this is somewhat speculative. Did one of the three intimates mention this to Luke as he gathered information for his gospel? Was the angel presented in a vision to Jesus, which was somehow communicated to his disciples after his resurrection? These are questions for thought that we are not probably going to ever have an answer to this side of heaven. But things just interesting to ponder about, things that we just don't have all the knowledge to understand the mystery. And it goes on, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. We would expect that Luke, who is the supposed physician in the group, to record the unusual physical condition of Jesus, which was no doubt told to him by those who were there. Again, they didn't record it, but neither did they comment all throughout his 3 years of ministry, all the medical details that Luke was so careful to do during the healings and the miracles and so forth. The condition that Jesus apparently suffered from is I'm not going to say it's common, but it's a well-known condition. It's called hematidrosis, and it's characterized by the oozing of blood from the skin or mucous membranes without having any apparent injury. The condition is known to occur throughout various parts of the body, with common areas including the forehead, the nails, and other skin surfaces. It can also manifest itself as blood-stained tears called hemolacria or bleeding from the nose. The exact cause of hematidrosis is not fully understood, but it is believed to be related to the body's fight or flight response, which, is an unusual condition to study in itself. We studied it and had to do training about fight or flight in the Middle East because, just the situations we were in. And we did a lot of training in self-defense and self-protection and what to do when somebody pulls a gun on you or tries to grab you, because you're either going to have a fight reaction or a flight reaction. And knowing this ahead of time and making the right decisions is important to saving your life or saving members of your team's life. But that I'm just chasing a rabbit here. But under extreme stress or fear, what happens is tiny blood vessels, the capillaries, okay, around sweat glands can rupture, which allows blood to mix with sweat. This can happen in situations of intense anxiety, trauma, or severe emotional distress. So when he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Depression always causes one to crave sleep. This was late, probably midnight or later. There is no doubt the disciples had to be emotionally overwhelmed at this time with all that Jesus had told them was going to happen. Then he said to Peter, "What, Simon?" Notice he doesn't use the term Peter anymore here, not the rock. Now he's Simon. "Are you sleeping? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Why do you sleep? Rise, watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation." Oh, that theme just keeps coming back up. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So finding Peter, the apparent leader of the disciples, sleeping resulted in a mild rebuke to him. However, notice the Lord's understanding of the weakness of the flesh, having himself taken upon flesh as the infinite God-man and supernaturally able to overcome the flesh, meaning the temptation in the wilderness, specifically where he overcame, he was still able to understand and sympathize with Peter's weakness. Notice also his continued concern over Peter and temptation that he would soon be facing. Again, a second time, he went away and prayed and spoke the same words, saying, "Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. I'm just thinking in my mind that has got to have been totally frustrating, not for the Lord also, but to the disciples. And why are we
Your
failing
own
here?
weakness.
Yeah, why are we failing here? So he left them, went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So, after 3 times of agonizing prayer, Jesus finds Peter and the other disciples have fallen asleep again. And it's not clear at this point if Jesus supernaturally knew that his betrayers were at hand or his betrayer was at hand with the crowd, or maybe because there was a ruckus had started with the disciples, who had been left at the entrance to the garden. Either way, Jesus begins to boldly step forward to face his accusers. Thoughts, comments, questions?
The time during Jesus's crucifixion, how long was he separated from the Father? Was it the full 3 days total, or does it really go into any depth? I've never been able to see any time period for that. I'm just curious.
I don't know. I mean, I would assume it was from the point of his death until his actual resurrection, which is about 2 days, 2.5 days.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, don't know exactly how that even works out in God's time, in God's economy, because his timing is not the same
Even
as ours, and we've covered that before.
can you imagine even a millionth of a second would probably
Yeah,
be intolerable.
but it was just the thought of that. I mean, 1,000 years, is a blink of an eye in God's time. This was barely a blink of an eye in a couple of days, and it was so agonizing, to the Lord that in this humanity he wanted to die. The suffering was so great. He said, "Take this away from me, but only if it's your will. I will do what you want me to do." He was willing to face it, but it was so terrible just to be separated for that short period of time. That I don't think I can't get my head around it.
Can't comprehend it.
It showed how great his love was for the Father.
Yes,
He really desired the Father that much.
yeah, exactly right. These are very good. Okay, I've included in your handout today a map of Jerusalem at this time, which depicts the routes supposedly that Jesus took from Gethsemane into the trials that we're about ready to study. So that's there for you to, if you want to put it in your front pocket or your back pocket to refer to as we move forward, that's fine. I had what I consider to have been a better map, and I've not been able to locate where it is so I can print it out for you. But this is a decent one. It's not bad. I think it is, fairly accurate. I think the question of where exactly Annis's and Caiaphas's, houses were is in question, but at least where Pilate, held court, and you've got in there where Herod would have been in his palace, and you can generally see, the route that was taken in the city, and you have a picture there of the city. You can see the houses, the alleyways, and all of those things. If you picture him coming into the city, going someplace in the city to hold, have the Last Supper, going back out, getting to the garden, and then being, apprehended, which is we're going to look at next week, and then the trials will begin. And he faced a total of 6 trials on Friday morning. An incredible series of events that too often you just read through individual gospel accounts, of the passion, and you miss it. You don't realize how many trials he actually went to, and what had to been done to him in such a short period of time. And we will get into that in depth in the weeks coming ahead. But
Looks like it's probably a good 2 miles at least.
mm-hmm.
You look at that 1,000-mile marker.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Close to it anyway.
So anyway, just keep that for reference, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's look at our application here. See what we can apply to ourselves. Okay, talking about the Lord. I want you to notice that he took special care to include his most intimate disciples in his deep anguish. And drawing upon MacArthur's words, which I think are accurate, he took them not because he needed them, but because they needed to witness firsthand his struggle and then ultimate commitment to perform the Father's will. Now, as we go forth in life, these are applications, again, that you are to internalize and think about for yourself. And what this means is when you have deep anguish, great sorrow, great struggles, you should not shy away from including people who know you and love you and with whom you are intimate.
Good point.
And it does not necessarily mean that they themselves are going to help you. But it does mean that how you handle your anguish and sorrow and faith at that time can be a lesson, a teaching point, a blessing to them,
Testimony.
a testimony. Thank you.
In doing just what you said to do, I was putting myself into that. A, I failed to write down the missing words for B. Can you tell me the words again?
Of
He
course.
took them
Not
not. Okay.
because he needed them,
Okay. Yeah.
okay, but because they needed to witness firsthand his commitment
Mm-hmm.
to perform the Father's will.
Thank you.
Now, what I'm not saying when you've got anguish and sorrow and grief that you gather people around you that can just sit there and wail with you, okay? While you are ignoring, God being in the picture somehow and being the source of your comfort, the source of your peace. If you've abandoned that to grief and sorrow and are totally focused on that,
And you're taking
that's the
glory.
opposite of what I'm saying, you want to try to do. It's interesting, I mentioned this to the ladies the other day in the Middle East, when they have funerals, and they don't do funerals like we do. It's not a religious ceremony. They just take the body and bury it. But, like we'll go to a church or a chapel and there'll be a pastor there and there'll be a message given and people, greeting the family and all that kind of stuff. But in the Middle East, if you have somebody in your family, who has passed away close to you, what they do is they rent out a open space of ground somewhere. If it's in the city, it's just an empty lot or somewhere, and they pitch a huge tent and they set up chairs and, a family member, the leader of the family is there, sitting in his chair, and everybody else just comes and they just sit hours at a time, and very little is spoken to the person who's lost a loved one. It's not expected that you're going to come there and provide words of comfort or provide comfort in any way, shape, or form. You're just going to be there and sit and engage in, the sorrow, help take it, you put it on your shoulders with the person. You don't really have to communicate anything. You're just there with them. Go back to Job. Check it out. Okay. That's what his friends did. He was sitting there, and they came and sat, for days. And finally, they spoke, and they screwed up when they spoke.
Yeah.
Open mouth,
open the mouth, you know.
insert foot.
What's it say?
Bigfoot.
Let's see, don't speak and they may think you're done, but if you do speak, they know you're done.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah, that's a proverb.
Yeah, I remember when I was taking my oral exams for my doctorate. You write your dissertation, it gets reviewed and graded by, half a dozen other, professors, doctorates, with doctorates, and then you have to pass that exam. And then if your dissertation is then accepted, then you had to go for 2 hours worth of oral exams. And the first hour dealt with the content of your dissertation, the academic content, and you had to defend, and then the second hour, in my case, in seminary, a ministerial doctorate, um, dealt with just ministry practices, and they were free to ask you any question they wanted, to test, your ministerial capabilities. And I remember one of the professors that was on the council, grading me. He was a lot younger than me. He had a lot less, ministerial experience than me, but he was a professor and he was, brought on the council to grade my dissertation and participate in the oral exam. And I remember the question he asked me was, okay, Bill, you're called upon to do a funeral, and the person, that you are coming to do the funeral for was definitely lost, and what do you say to the family? How do you, how do you handle that?
Wow.
You know, and and I said I wouldn't say anything. I would follow the biblical model that you find in the book of Job, and I would just sit with the person and I would grieve with the person. Maybe put my arm around him, but no words are going to bring comfort or healing to somebody who's lost a loved one who's now spending eternity in hell. What could I possibly say? Why should I open my mouth and put my foot in it? And I did that as a young neophyte theologue. I remember painfully having done that. It was one of my first bereavement calls, as a young seminarian. And I was called to this house to comfort this young lady. She and her husband had been relatively recently married, I think maybe 1 or 2 years. And he was a truck driver, and I don't think they had any church background whatsoever. But I was called to go to the house and provide, try to provide comfort. So I'm going there, trying to think of the pithy words, I can say, and right. So foolish. But anyway, I'm there, and she's grieving, terribly, that her husband has just been killed in this. He drove an 18-wheeler and he had a wreck and was killed. And I'm sitting there trying to comfort her, and the door bursts open, and in comes one of her friends in a total frantic frenzy, and she calls out and says to the grieving widow and everybody in the room, I was just told that, I don't know the man's name, but your husband was still alive at the crash, and the truck caught fire and he burned alive. He was burned. And I'm sitting there going, nothing I could say. I tried foolishly, thinking I've got to do something, I got to say something, but there's absolutely nothing you can do to take away that hurt, that grief, that sorrow, that pain. and man, I look back on those days and I'm so embarrassed and so, frustrated with my failure at that point, not knowing or understanding these things. But it just, when I was going through that exam, that oral exam, and that young, um, academic, posed that question to me, I know he was looking for some kind of an academic reply, and a different form of biblical reply. But I said, what can you say? There's nothing you can say. You only have to sit there and just weep and cry and grieve with the person. No words, because they're not going to do anything. And that I remember. I don't remember anything else about my oral exam, but that one did too.
Mm. Mm.
So Jesus challenged his disciples to pray not to fall into temptation. What he did at the model prayer, what he did throughout his ministry, that's what he did throughout his last days. In great emotional agony, he prostrated himself before the Father as he prayed. I've talked to you before about praying and posture and praying, and sometimes you're so full of grief, hurt, agony, frustration, you just fall on your face, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Other times you need to be like Jesus, who when he prayed, he looked up to heaven. He opened his eyes, looked up to heaven, and I believe probably practiced, the things that the people in the Middle East told me, you open your hands up expecting God to give you what you ask for, and criticism of Christians as we know them today, folding your hands, bowing your head, closing your eyes, praying with your shoes on and sitting casually in your chair. You know, sometimes you just need to prostrate yourself. Sometimes you need to look up into the face of God and just open your hands. And, you know, uh, despite the weight of the moment, WEIGHT of the moment, he still referred to the Father in the most intimate of terms, Abba. He prayed specifically for the will of the Father to be done, despite his personal distress. And he expected his most trusted disciple would remain awake while he prayed, but understood the weakness of his flesh. Simon, are you sleepy? Could you not watch with me? The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He warned Peter not to sleep, but to rise, watch, and pray to avoid temptation. I'm going to emphasize that one again. You'll hear it next week. He persisted in his plea to the Father. Again, a second time he went away and prayed, spoke the same words. So he let them win again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. And finally, he knew that the final hour had come to finish all the Father had given him to do. The hour is at hand. So many times he says, my time is not at hand. Now it is. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions, guys?
I was just looking at he asked him to rise and watch and pray. I'm just thinking so many times when you're really tired, first thing you do, you can get comfortable. Next thing you know, you kind of, I can see them on the ground, Right, stand up, watch them, and keep from falling asleep.
I'll never forget.
Their stomachs were probably full too from eating. That has something to make you drowsy.
I'll never forget. Just before I left to go to the mission field, we had been so stressed getting things ready to leave, and the house, property. I was like my last day on staff at Bellevue, and just exhausted from packing and doing all the administrative work and everything. I mean, I was so exhausted. And then a close friend came in to pray with me, because he knew it would be the last time he'd see me before going, So I greatly appreciated it. I loved him dearly. And we got down on our knees, with leaning on chairs, to pray. And he started praying and he prayed. And then I started to pray. And as I was praying out loud, I fell asleep.
Oh, you felt what?
I fell asleep praying out loud. I started speaking in tongues. I mean, I was, and I woke myself up, and I'm looking at him. He's looking at me.
That's funny.
And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm just so tired, and I, meant well, but I was sound asleep and just making noise coming out of my mouth, so.
Yeah.
But I was exhausted.
Same thing happened.
Was good.
There's some people
And something else that you mentioned earlier in the lesson is those guys, depression can bring on
Sure.
Oh yeah.
sleepiness, because I've had that happen to me many
Oh,
times.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
I guarantee you, when I
Being
get
tired?
frustrated, depressed,
Being tired?
first thing I want to do is just stay in
Depression
bed.
causes you to feel sleepy
Oh,
and unmotivated.
Mm-hmm. Just want to stay in bed.
something else I noticed in this after he left the upper room, before they left the upper room,
Okay.
they sang praise. to
Yes.
God.
Yes.
His heart was in that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That was part of the notes to remember from last week, that even in the midst of this,
Yes.
he praised the Lord. Praise the Father. Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, the action's going to pick up, and got a lot of stuff to learn, I think, with the ladies. They're one lesson ahead. And